Okay. So I feel heard. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll talk with Mimi. I can't remember what I wrote, but I'll start with my, um, my husband kind of, we practice this, the one-on-one, the empathy circle, and he's in some men's groups here in Boise, and he gets really frustrated with those groups because they don't do empathy. And the rules in those groups are the person speaks and all you can do is like affirmations afterwards. So there's no empathy. And he gets so frustrated. Like he said, when he talked about something that was pretty personal and significant, that it just felt empty afterwards. And so in a second, I'll tell you more about how the empathy circle instructions relate to this.
Okay, so what I heard is that you wanted to share your husband's experience in some groups he tried to attend to participate, where they promised that they're gonna practice empathy, but what he experienced was absolutely different from your experience in our group, because he realized that they don't practice empathy. Excuse me, but what they do is just they exchange some affirmations, and this made him feel really empty at the end of the session.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I shared with him I shared with him the draft of new instructions I had written up to get his feedback. And he said, well, these don't really address just two people doing empathy together. I'm kind of going back to what Edwin's saying about the value of just two people. And I said, yeah, because that's in our training. The instructions that we're writing right now are mainly for our training course. And so in our training course, it's going to be usually more than two people. So that's why they're not written as much for two people. So I'll go ahead and you can reflect back.
Yeah, so you discussed more with your husband about how the empathy circle takes place in our group, and he expected that we would. I'm not sure I got this point very well. So you explained to him that in our group we tend to be more than two people. That's why the information shared, including this draft, has to do with 3 to 5 people, but. And this made an impression that was sounded a little strange to him. But I'm sorry, I didn't get something at some point you said about it. I didn't get what you said about the two people. He expected to have.
He felt the instructions should be written, should be flexible enough that, like in these men's groups, they call them dyads, where they take.
Dyads.
Yes, they take like a group of 10 people and then they break them up into pairs. And then the pairs do, like they would do the empathic listening, together. So he was saying then, in a way, our instructions don't fit that model. And so this is just kind of a side note. But so does that make it clearer?
Yes, definitely. So what he expected is for us to have to form small groups of 2 people, that like the dyads. He tried to practice with the other groups where in every 10 people they form 5 groups of 2, and they just try to practice the empathy circle in this dyad. But you explained, as we said before, that this is not the case here, and the format we follow is absolutely different from what he tried to follow with the male group.
Yeah. So now I'm changing a little bit, and what I like about the empathy circle is the practice. It's, even though I try to practice every day, but that's, to me, the main thing is getting the practice. But what I wish I could get more from it is feedback more. I want to learn more. I want to improve my skills. And I sometimes feel that the way we do it, I'm not improving I just want to improve my skills more. And I'm afraid the way we do it, because we don't really give feedback, you can kind of tell, but so that's where I get frustrated a little.
Mm-hmm. It seems that you really like how we perform our empathy circles, but you have some serious concerns about how much you improve week after week, and you think that you could have your improvement could have been more noticeable. But you think that it's because of the lack of feedback we receive, that you are not sure that you develop the empathy skill as much as you would expect from yourself, and this makes you feel really concerned about the empathy circles, and probably you feel that something is missing.
Right, but I'm aware that some people don't want that feedback, because sometimes feedback can be sensitive, and so or it depends on how the feedback is given. But I'm also aware that within an empathy circle, that some people might want feedback and other people may not want it.
Mm-hmm. So no matter how concerned you are about the feedback we receive, and that it's not as much as you would like it to be, you think you believe that some people might not like receiving feedback because this might hurt them and this might make them feel vulnerable. So for this reason, even though you also believe that it is very important the way we used to offer feedback, but even though you understand this, and for that reason you can just control your feelings and not end up being overly concerned and maybe disappointed, because this is a logical obstacle.
Right. And it's also when we have diverse people, people with different skill sets, and if you have a beginner on or something, they're not going to have the skills to give kind of constructive feedback. So it's kind of, if you did have feedback, it's kind of how would it happen, and I think would be something to figure out.
So you believe that all the participants in a group don't have the same skills, the necessary skills, the skills needed for them to offer feedback, and this might make the whole procedure a little more complicated, because people come from different culture and they are used to different things, so they might not be in a position to offer feedback in a sense that will improve the empathy skills of the other members.
Mm-hmm. So I feel fully heard.
Great. So can I just talk to Nancy now, or you're not ready? Should I go for another one? Nancy, do you want me to try with you? It's
Sure.
Okay. All right. So I found Ingrid's comments very thoughtful, and I was thinking about how to design my empathy classes, but I was very skeptical about some elements that I think that we haven't developed yet.
So you're working on your empathy classes, and you found some of the points that Ingrid made might be very important in terms of developing those classes. And so you have some concerns about some aspects of those classes.
Mm-hmm. And for this reason, I sent an email today to Edwin where I just explained some of my concerns. And this is what I told him, that, okay, we practice empathic listening, which is it is a core part of our empathy circles, but this is only part of the communication, because it would be better if we could act out in groups of 2 or 3 people, where let's say when we are 3 people, we act out that we have a difference, a serious difference between us, a disagreement, let's say on a social issue. And so we disagree, and the third person can be the mediator that helps us find a solution. So we see how empathic listening, how can I say, is being practiced in a real life situation. Okay, and I'll tell you the second one.
So it sounds like you're looking at a practice or a process, and you discussed this with Edwin through email a little bit, but a process in which you would have a third person listening or participating more as a mediator during an actual practice session. And I'm not sure exactly if you described, and I missed it, what the mediator would do as a result of that practice session.
Yeah, okay, I'll explain. So let's say that we are 3 people, and let's say that I discuss with Ingrid, and we pretend that we have a disagreement, okay? And you are the mediator, and you try to practice empathic listening with both of us and help us reach and help us go beyond the disagreement through practicing empathic listening.
Okay, so what I understand then is that the mediator's role would be to practice the empathic listening with both the parties to help them kind of move beyond the disagreement.
Right. This is the one format. And the second, I told him that would be, let's say that you and we have a disagreement. We act out this, but we try through empathic listening to smoothen this disagreement and just try to communicate, because this is what happens in real life. So in real life, when we have a disagreement with somebody, we don't just repeat what the first person said. We just try to find a solution. We want a conclusion, what a result. So that is the second format I think that we need in order to have a first-hand experience of what empathic listening is in real life situation.
So it sounds like you see it as 2 different formats, one in which you would have 2 parties and a mediator who would help facilitate the discussion with empathic listening. And in the second format, you would just have the 2 parties who are in some sort of disagreement, working with each other and practicing empathic listening to try and resolve their disagreement. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely correct. Because I feel that I have developed, and I'm developing, of course, the main component that is empathic listening. But I want to see how it works in real life with my family, with friends, with my students. How can I use it so as to have a result? So when I have a disagreement with my student, how can I improve my relationship with this person through empathic listening?
So you have some question and some concern about how to improve relationships with the empathic listening, and that's based on these 2 different formats that you would propose as sort of a standard for how you would teach it and use it.
Yes, exactly this. Yes, I want to see how it works in real life with real people, not just having one skill, but I want to see the whole procedure. So disagreement, empathic listening, and solution, which will be that we are together. Okay, we went beyond our differences. We just keep moving. We go back to our lives and continue doing whatever we want to do.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you would be prepared then to translate some of the practice and the skills and the teaching about it to real life so that people can use that in their everyday interactions, whether it's family, friends, or colleagues.
Exactly. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay.
So now you can select who you'd like to speak to, Nancy, and go reflect back.
Oh my goodness. Something that I would speak to.
Well, first, just select who you want to speak
Oh.
to. Just one of the three of us. You can choose anyone.
Oh gosh. Well, we can just keep going in a circle and I can speak to you. That's fine.
Okay.
But the issue to speak about, that's like, oh dear.
Okay, so hearing a little bit of distress about selecting a topic to talk about.
Okay, so let's see, maybe I'll talk a little. Okay, so I'll talk about the empathic listening from sort of a super beginner's place, okay? And a couple of things concern me, or not necessarily concern me, but maybe confuse me and cause me pause, I guess I should say. I'm not choosing my words very carefully here, but so to put it, trying to formulate my thoughts here. One of the things that it seems to me that I'm struggling with in empathic listening is that there's almost this void of emotion. And so on the one hand, I get that that it's about being heard and being understood and being able to go deeper on your own and still being heard and understood. But on the other hand, there seems to me to be this piece missing, which is this emotional involvement, this affirmation or validation, or maybe a little bit of sympathy. And so I'm a little conflicted right now with some of it. And again, at the very beginning of my learning and growth. So I'm sure it'll all sort of smooth out, but that's kind of first impressions for me.
Okay, so you're kind of just speaking about your first impressions from what would be maybe a beginner's point of view, and you have some, I don't know if it's concerns that it seems like there's not a lot of emotion or feeling in the empathic listening, and that maybe a more, maybe a sense of sympathy or care feeling is something you'd like to see.
That's exactly right. I know you did a really good job reflecting that back, because I don't think I came across totally cohesive, but that's exactly right. I was practicing empathic listening with my husband yesterday over a pretty emotional issue, and I think we both felt at the end of the discussion that it seemed to just be void of some of that emotional involvement. I could go very objective, and that's what empathic listening seems a lot like to me, is that it's so objective, so neutral, that the listener, while they may feel heard, do they feel, validated, and I recognize that there's a difference there, but I'm just having a hard time threading that needle. Okay,
so there's this. What I'm understanding is you had you were doing empathic listening with your husband around sounds like a contentious or a conflict issue, and that you were just noticing the quality of it. That it seemed like it was sort of objective and didn't have any real feeling in it, and maybe left sort of, I don't know, with like a coldness or something, feeling, or objective, or had a maybe detached feeling to it, and the sort of the sense of care was sort of missing, and you're just trying to sort of make sense out of this. Like, there's something that you would like is like more care, more connection, more feeling involved. And instead it seemed kind of cold, and you're just trying to make sense out of that.
That's exactly right. And so this is short, so I do feel fully heard. Okay,
then feel fully heard around that. Then I guess I'll speak. You sure there's not more? If there's more, there's time for more.
Are you having lots of fun?
What?
So you're having fun?
Yeah, this is what we're doing. So is there more, just to be sure that there?
I think at this time, no, because
okay.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm too early on in some of the discussion and practice to be able to go any deeper with it at this point.
So it's still kind of early in this kind of exploration, so you don't feel like you have enough there to kind of go deeper with yet. So okay. Well, then I'll speak. Thank you. I'll speak to Ingrid.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I know what Nancy is talking about, that the empathic listening, it can have creative feelings. I sometimes see it as sort of a monotone feeling that, I think I understand that quality, and I'm trying to address it as well. There's a sense of, what is that? What does it mean, that quality? When you just do empathic listening, it can be sort of like a monotone, detached or something feeling. It doesn't have a richness of felt experience to it. So I'm sort of like tapping in. I think I know what she's meaning by there. Yeah.
So when Nancy expressed what she said, you kind of felt, yeah, I can connect to that. You felt it was something that you've experienced as well.
Yeah.
And it's also something that you're trying to maybe figure out how to make it a little bit richer, instead of having the monotone or maybe having it too objective. And you're kind of struggling with the same thing.
Yeah. And I'm trying to kind of tap into that. The first thing that comes to mind is, same thing kind of can happen with my partner and I when we do empathic listening. And there's something about that we kind of get stuck. And I think that one way would be is to have more people in the circle, right? It's like, because it kind of brings in different energies, that we kind of get sort of stuck in what we're willing to say or something, or in the conflict. So,
So you've noticed this yourself when you practice it with your partner, that there's something that just doesn't quite feel right. You kind of feel stuck, and so you're thinking, well, how can we improve this? How can we do something different? And then maybe having more people might be one way to work on it.
Because it kind of creates more points of view and kind of more energy.
That's right.
So that's the aspect. And I think of mediation I've done. I remember my sister and sister-in-law have had conflict, like for 8 years. And then they were finally willing to take part in an empathy circle. And they were actually able, there is that sort of that monotone, feeling. I don't know if it's detached, but it's like there is sort of a structure there, and it created a space for us to work through these issues. It did, and it kind of like things kind of got resolved, and it took 4 hours of empathic listening. So there's sort of that aspect too, that things do it does create a space to address these issues, so these conflicts. So yeah.
Yeah. So you've noticed that as you're kind of thinking through this now, since Nancy brought it up, that when your sister and sister-in-law, was that right?
Mm-hmm.
That they've had issues for a long time, but you've noticed that when they use the empathic listening, and it's usually related to a conflict, that objectiveness maybe kind of helps create some space. Which maybe makes it easier to deal with the conflict.
Yeah, and it's not really objective. I heard the term objective, but it's not. There is a sense of presence. Like objective is, a lot of it's kind of struggling with these words and kind of being really articulate with them. But so it's not really being objective. It's just not, being judgmental or. If I could just a reflection on that. So
the word objective isn't doesn't connect with you.
Yeah.
That the word presence, you're not exactly sure what the word is, but it's like presence sounds a little bit better.
Yeah, it's that empathy is not being objective. A lot of times it's seen as objective, when it seems to me that empathy is sort of its own force, that to be empathic, you really have to be present, you know, and you have to be sort of present with the person who's like speaking. And so you're not kind of detached objective, you're kind of very present, but yeah, so there's kind of that aspect to it.
So that the presence is such a quality. Presence is what you have to be. It's not really objective. I mean, you have to be with the speaker so much, and what they're saying, but it's really presence is the word, and like objective really isn't kind of related to it.
Yeah, so there's kind of that aspect. So it's a great topic to bring up, because I think I get the sense of how to make it how to bring more care and warmth into the experience, and that's kind of so you're
really glad the topic came up, because it's something you want. You would like to have. You desire some more, having it to be more warm and caring yourself too.
Oh, and then one thing is Carl Rogers, who has kind of really articulated this in therapy. He said there's 3 ingredients. One is empathy. Second is positive regard, which is care. And then the third part is authenticity. So it takes kind of those 3 components to really have a sort of a meaningful growth producing, process, I guess, or way of being.
Yeah, so you remembered that, you're trying to think now, this, you remembered that Carl Rogers had even said it's more than empathy, and that there's these 2 other components.
Care and authenticity are the other ones. And,
that bring it all together.
Mm-hmm. And so with that, then I'm also just wanting to add to what Mimi was saying in terms of having real conflict can kind of make things more dynamic. And I had done some training with some students, with like high school students on empathy. So we did a practice where one of them was a superhero and the other was a supervillain. And then they would talk to each other and try to work out their problems instead of fight each other. So one person was like Captain America and the other was, the Joker or something, or one person was, Iron Man, the other one was Satan. And they would kind of like dialogue and work out their issues with each other. And it was really a lot of fun. The students really enjoyed, kind of taking on the role of superheroes and trying to work out their problems instead of beat each other up.
So you found a way to do where it's almost kind of imaginary way for when you did an empathy program with high school students, and it reminded, when Mimi talked about what she was trying to do, it reminded you of this program. And with having the high school students do the superheroes and the villains, they were able to kind of use the same process, and it was fun for them.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay, I'll talk with Mimi. And let's see, there's lots, I guess first I'll say I connect also with what Nancy and Edwin are saying as well. I agree with them, and it's kind of like figuring out a way to do it that sounds caring and warmth, but also not too involved, not like taking over their story or trying to solve it for them.
Mm-hmm. So what Edwin and Nancy mentioned previously has really touched you, and you find their comments really meaningful, and you would like to add the element of care in our empathy circles, and you really miss this way. You would like it to be into play. However, you believe that we should be careful and not to feel that their problem or their situation is our bad situation, just end up being extremely involved into the other person's story.
Yeah, and I also connected with what Edwin, when he was talking about his sister and sister-in-law, about, because I've noticed with my husband, when we're talking about something that is controversial, and I'm vested in it and he is too, that empathic listening gives me space, so I don't, if I'm listening to him, I can, it helps me not get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps in so many ways, but it is that kind of that space that allows it, so it's easier to hear, I think, and stay engaged.
Mm-hmm. So what Edwin mentioned about the disagreement his sister and his sister-in-law used to have has really resonated with you, and it reminded you of your discussions with your husband. And when sometimes you have a disagreement, you have realized how much empathic listening has helped you to feel that you have more space and you avoid being defensive, so you are in a better position to talk over this disagreement you have, and makes you feel much better.
Yes. And when I heard you talking about, because I believe I heard you talking earlier about using kind of like disagreements, we need to bring, whether it's using social issues or whatever, but getting more practice in using empathic listening when we really care about something. And the other person does too, but it's a disagreement, because that's when it's really, really, really hard, when it's kind of personal, and being able to do it when it's personal is like a higher skill level. And so I really support your recommendation to do something related to when we do it, to have issues that are social issues or something that more controversial, or we have differing opinions on.
Mm-hmm. It seems that you found my recommendation, the plan that I proposed earlier about acting out a disagreement. You found it really interesting, and you would like us to practice it, because when people disagree on social issues, let's say on social issues, yeah, or on other issues, this gets very personal and makes things harder. And this means asks for people to have more and higher skills in order to find their way into this disagreement. And you think that through practicing this scenario, we will be greatly benefited by this.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Great. So, yeah. Okay, I will talk to Edwin. So I have many things I want to share. My goodness. First of all, okay, I'm going to brainstorm. First of all, I have so many questions to ask Ingrid. I want to ask her about her husband. I want to ask her about his experience and how he felt, not because I'm curious in a negative way, of course, but it really hurt me when I heard her saying that her husband had the willingness to join a group, and he ended up being disappointed. I said, no. I mean, how many people might have tried the same thing and might have been disappointed and might have realized, you know what, empathy, what's that? That's a silly story. We don't need this. And I would really love to learn more about what kind of group this is, who runs this group, what kind of participants, and if these groups become more and more popular in the States. I really love to ask her many things about that, because I ended up very sad. Oh my goodness, that was very bad for him. I empathize with him, even though I don't know him.
Okay, so there's sort of a flood of questions that are coming up for you, and it was stimulated by just feeling some pain when Ingrid was talking about her husband and him having a sort of unsatisfactory, just not a pleasant feeling in his men's group, just that it caused you pain, and it just led to a lot of questions that you would like to ask Ingrid about the experience.
Yeah, and I would also like to ask Nancy many things, because I would like to know why she decided to become I think she said conflict something, dispute resolution, something like that. So she decided to learn more or study how to do things easier when explosions are taking place or something. I'm really curious to learn more about that. Yes.
Yeah, so there's even more questions, like, just hearing Nancy's interest in conflict mediation. You're really wondering, like, what got her interested in there and her experience. So you have all these questions that you're kind of excited, maybe feeling some excitement to ask, and curiosity.
Yes, I would say interest.
Oh, interest.
Yeah,
okay, more.
It's a kind of tender thing, I will have the kind of interest to learn more, because I just want to learn about, not because I'm just a curious person who wants to, not in this way. I hope you understand the difference. I have an interest in you, so I want to learn more about your choices, your thoughts. It's not just, I'm just a curious person. I like to ask questions. It's not like this.
Oh, okay. So you're just wanting to make the distinction that you're really interested in who Nancy is and about her life as a person, and that's why you're kind of curious about, not curious, but interested in what her experience is, because there's maybe a sense of wanting to connect, a sense of connection underneath that.
Right, because what Nancy said and what Ingrid's husband experienced confirmed one of my initial thoughts about empathy, and that was that people use the word empathy, but the content of the word varies. So Nancy mentioned that she had a discussion with her husband, but the element of care was missing, and something similar, more or less, happened in the case of Ingrid's husband. So what kind of empathy is that if people don't care? Because I can't think of empathy without genuine caring for each other. Otherwise, if we don't care, then our hearts are cold. And a cold heart is not a motivated heart to build bridges with the other person. It's like, like when lawyers discuss and they try, to find a solution, but it's a cold procedure. But with people, we need temperature, we need warmth. And I believe that we have to check what each one of us means when we use the word empathy. What is the content of the word? How we understand it?
So you're saying that people use the word empathy, and it's different for different people. Like, what are they really meaning by it? And for you, empathy and care is sort of one and the same. That it's about having a a sense of care and warmth, and maybe is a way of connecting with people. It's a way of more deeply connecting.
Yeah, because as you said, Carl Rogers talked about empathy, care, and authenticity, and I think that this is a combination that is so meaningful. We should have a real interest for each other. Otherwise, the person cannot feel fully heard. I mean, the heart does not participate. The other person cannot be just a recorder that we push the play button and just repeats what we said. We need connection, and this cannot happen if we don't really care. And to add to this, I would like to talk about facial expressions and body language. And I have talked about this many times in the past. And I believe that 90% of our communication is not what we say, but what we don't say. So I believe that when it comes to empathic listening, our facial expression, the expressions, the tone of our voice, our body language helps to make our speaker feel that we are 100% present, and we are really interested, not curious, in what they have said.
Mm-hmm. So there's you're talking about the body language. Like, how do you show your interest? And one of it is through body language. And so that kind of conveys a real sense of interest in the other person, as well as you're kind of making the point that reflective listening or empathic listening, it's just not like being a recorder where you just kind of say back coldly, maybe, like a lawyer or something, kind of detached from any warmth. It can just, instead of just being sort of factual, that's not what you see as empathy being, that kind of coldness. It's maybe more of a feeling of connection with warmth and connection.
Right. And the last thing I would like to mention was what Ingrid mentioned before, that really was a little shocking. It was right, of course, that many people are afraid of receiving feedback. You know what? When it comes to empathy and feelings, people should take the risk to feel. They might end up being hurted. That's how the game is played. If somebody doesn't want to feel to take the risk, then the person should stay home alone. If you are with your TV, probably you will never feel hurted. But when we are with people, we take the risk to open up our heart, to invest in them, and they might reciprocate, or they might just leave us, and they might just really hurt our feelings. So I find the comment very thoughtful, and I think that if we practice a little bit how we can give feedback in order not to hurt the other person, and if the other person feels open to say, you know what, buddy, I didn't like your comment because really I find it very hard, then isn't this empathic listening? If I offer feedback to you and I used some words that have really saddened you, then what if you tell me, let me know, and I say I will try to improve it, and next time I'll give you feedback in an improved way.
So you're sort of building on this aspect that Ingrid was saying, that she would like some sort of feedback about how she's doing her listening, and but she's also has concern that people may feel uncomfortable with getting that feedback, and she's trying to kind of understand that. You're building on that by saying it's a risk to relate with people, and you need to kind of take a little bit of risk and like vulnerability, and then how do you? And there may be ways of kind of easing that to make it not so risky or so potentially painful, and so looking at how to make it more easily done or accessible.
Yeah, I just believe that the comment was thoughtful, right to the point. It's true that many people feel like this, and I think that through empathic listening, we can just make people feel less afraid, and they could open up more easily.
So through empathic listening, that it actually, the process itself makes you feel less afraid, and that it creates a space for opening up.
Yes, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay. And I'll speak to Nancy. Yeah, that's with the empathy circle. I just see this as like a basic starting point, and it's sort of a basic, fairly safe structure that we're doing, how we're doing it, and that we can go deeper. And how do we go deeper is one of the questions.
So you see the empathy circle and this experience today is sort of the basic introduction, kind of just the beginnings of it, but we can go much deeper based on the experience that we've had today.
Yeah, what I find is having this basic empathic listening structure creates a sort of a safe structure that has a sense of fairness. Everyone gets sort of equal time in a sense. So it's like one person isn't going to so easily dominate the whole discussion, that like without these basic rules, one person kind of takes charge, the other one speaks or whatever. So the basic structure kind of creates a little bit of somewhat fairness, that everyone will be fully heard to their satisfaction of what they have to say.
So you found that the structure in empathic circles or empathy circles is really important in creating a safe space and also a fair, balanced space for all of the participants, so that everybody gets a chance to speak, to listen, to practice, and to feel safe in taking the risk of doing the work there.
Yeah. And it can be unsafe because people start screaming and yelling at each other in really heavy-duty conflict situations. I've done empathy circles where two people are like speaking to each other. One person gets upset. They forget about the rules. They start screaming at the other person. And then the other person screams back. And I say, wait, we've got the rules. And they don't care. It's just like two dogs, two cats, whatever, just going at each other. And so all the rules go out the window, and so you kind of have that kind of issue too.
So ideally, the structure can be a really good thing, and it can provide a safe space. But there are exceptions, when people probably get way too emotionally involved and maybe get upset or angry, and you've seen them kind of get after each other and had to almost break up arguments, it sounds like. So yeah, the ideal is one thing, but sometimes the reality is very different.
Yeah, and for me, it's like creating this basic structure, practicing it over and over again. So when I think it can head off those blow-ups, just by practicing and integrating, doing it on, positive topics. So it kind of heads off those blow-ups, and then when those blow-ups have happened, I, as sort of the mediator, start listening to one person. I start reflecting back, really, what I hear you saying is that, what I hear you saying is what I hear you saying. So I start taking the role of the listener, and then they start calming down to the point, they come to a point where I say, okay, would you now try with the other person, reflecting back. So it takes the mediators kind of like holding the space, offering the listening to both sides, until they calm down enough to start getting back into the structure to kind of hold the problem and start working through it.
So it sounds like the structure can kind of provide a foundation for when those the speakers or the participants get upset. So it provides a space for you as a mediator to help them kind of come back on track by reflecting each one of their issues or their statements, and sort of allows some space to bring it all back into line. So even though it does go sideways, there's also space within that structure, it sounds like, that you can use to bring the whole process sort of back on track and the people back into the fold to some discussion with each other.
Right. Yeah, so it's a basic container. Metaphorically, I think of it as a container, and how do we make the container stronger and stronger to hold and to deepen the relationships? So that's sort of the kind of what I kind of see that we're doing. It's kind of the starting container. It's can be a little weak, is a container, but we can keep expanding it to deepen it.
Mm-hmm. So empathy circles are almost kind of, you see them almost as a figure of a sphere or a circle or a container, a place where people can kind of start, and then as the process grows, or as the issue or whatever we're talking about changes, there's room for that sphere or that circle or that container to kind of grow and expand and allow for some flexibility.
Yeah, and one of the things that we can deepen is how we share. So, to make it a more of an intimate, authentic sharing. And, this is being recorded, so, we're inhibited some. So we can get rid of the recording, and that's going to help, deepen it. So that's one thing. The other thing that deepens it is speaking to felt experience. So if we can name the feelings that we have, like I feel a little excitement, I feel like a feeling of growth in the discussion. And if we can identify our felt experience, I think that kind of deepens the experience too. And Mimi is always talking about the heart, the warmth, the care. So she's very into the felt bodily experience of it. And that also is like a core piece to start deepening the experience and the connection and the relating.
It sounds like you're also looking for ways always to deepen the experience for the people that are involved in the circle, or whether it's two people or more. And one way is obviously the recording, to let that go, and people might become more genuine or authentic, or less concerned about how they're going to come across and what that's going to look like in a future view of the recording. But the other one might be to be more open and sharing about how you feel about different aspects of whatever it is that you're talking about and the experience itself. So being sort of authentic and possibly caring, back to the Carl Rogers thing, and showing some of those emotions and how you feel about some of the work there.
Yeah, so there is that aspect of naming feelings. What are the feelings behind the feelings? So that kind of creates more of a quality of richness. Takes gets out of the sort of the head or the mentalizing. So that was one part. There was another piece that, what was it? Maybe if you just reflect that, then maybe the other piece will come to me.
So you're talking about naming the feelings that that people are experiencing, and that helps deepen the experience and the richness of the experience.
Yeah, and that's core to the whole. Oh yeah, empathy means feeling into. So in terms of the definition, it is to feel into. So it's to feel into my own experience, feel into everyone else's experience. So it seems that the feeling is the core component to have a felt awareness of what's happening in the group, in myself, with others, and to be able to articulate that and share that. So that is sort of taking the discussion deeper, going into that felt experience and yeah.
So feeling, if the definition or the meaning of empathy is feeling into it, then by the nature of the empathy circle or the empathic listening experience, a person would feel into what the other person is describing or articulating or feeling, and trying to just really get that very deep and rich understanding what they're saying and what they're feeling.
So that's part of the training, is to how do we bring the group, the circle, into deeper felt experience and be able to articulate and share those. And so that's part of the training, is to have tools for doing that. And the mirrored motion is a feeling. That's like one little exercise, right? Gets us tuned into a felt bodily experience. So yeah, that's one tool, I guess, one method.
Right, yeah, so I heard that from both you and Mimi about how important it is to incorporate some of that felt experience into the training, and trying to make sure that it's not just about reflecting, but also about looking deeper for those feelings and the shared experience. So how do you incorporate that into the training so that people can, can become better at it.
Yeah, and I know Ingrid has done NVC training, and basically NVC training gets to the feelings, like what are the feelings, and what are the feelings behind the feelings, what they call needs. So if you have a feeling of anger, it could be because you have a need for the feeling of mattering or something, or of being cared about. So you're kind of moving from one feeling to feelings that are behind feelings. And so that's, they call it needs, but some people call it values. So there's different terminology around this, but I just see it as feelings behind feelings, and how do we get to those deeper feelings.
So the nonviolent communication training, it sounds like that you're referencing, really gets to the feelings behind the feelings, which might be the needs or interests of the individual. And so it sounds to me like you have a bit of a question in terms of how with empathic listening, you can get beyond, that and into the feelings, into the needs of people who are involved in the discussion.
Yeah, it's that's part of the training, and I mean there's a lot of methods out there, so there's a lot of tools for doing that. So that's part of what we're working on. So yeah, glad you brought. Everybody's been talking about the feeling component because I think it's really critical, important.
So you appreciate the fact that we had some discussion about the feeling component today, and it kind of folds into some of the work and some of the thought you've given to some of the training that needs to be developed and worked on.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Did you say great?
Really? You're looking at me?
Oh, it's your turn to select whoever you want to speak to.
I wasn't sure. Okay, well, so I'll speak to Ingrid because something that you brought up I thought was kind of interesting, and because I fell off the empathic listening train and onto the problem solving train, one thing I thought about was, you talked about providing feedback for the practice of empathic listening. And I thought that was an interesting point and a very intuitive point, because a lot of the work that we do, especially in communications, you do want feedback because you want to improve on how you communicate and how you listen and all that. So I'll just sort of round that up for a minute and just say, so I appreciated that you brought up the feedback aspect of this, and I'm intrigued by it, and I had a couple of thoughts.
So the feedback is something that you're interested in, and you even have some, and especially, and with, you said even in being in communications, that feedback is important, and you have a couple thoughts on maybe how to address that.
That's true. And one of the things I thought was, in the introduction stuff that you did, Edwin, about the empathy circle, and you had the different roles of the speaker and the listener and the silent listener. I was wondering if there is a role in there for the silent listener to provide feedback, because a lot of times, and maybe Mimi in your experience too, and the training aspect of it, but I know in our background we often have a silent person in a 3-person circle. What's that called? A triad? I don't remember, but anyway, and that the role of that third person is to provide feedback to the person who's doing the work. So in this case, it would be the listener. So it would provide feedback to the listener after it was all done to help them know where they might have been able to do something different or better, or along those lines. So there could be more, because I guess I'm not sure what the role of the silent listener is.
So you have a potential, you see a potential opportunity to give the silent listener a role, because you're not really sure what role they do have. And one role they could have is actually giving some feedback on what their perception is of how things went.
Yeah,
Is that
that's exactly right. So I do think that there's some focus on the feedback aspect of learning how to do this would be really helpful. And maybe, in some of the training it's there somewhere, but I'm too new to know if it's there yet or not. But
so it's like important to you that feedback should be addressed somehow, and you're not sure, it may already be in the training, you're not sure how, but you yourself see the value in feedback.
Yeah, I definitely see the value in it. I just am not sure how it would be done. Like you, I think it's an interesting concept. So
yeah, so it's a little confusing as to where the best place to fit it in into the training.
Right. So I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll talk with Mimi, and I'll continue on with what Nancy was saying kind of what both the two of you both talked about, the feedback. And it is, when you think about it, there isn't a safer place to do it here than in our empathic circles, is there? And like when Mimi, you mentioned about giving feedback, or to me, I see it being safe here to give it. And like you said, if you gave me feedback and maybe I got a twinge, it kind of felt like a sting, but I could then say that. I could say, oh, I'm feeling that was a little sting right now. And then through our empathic process, we can kind of work through it. And so I do see it as a very safe place to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I heard is that you were thinking about feedback and how we could offer feedback to each other, and you feel that here in our empathic circle, things are much easier, and there is this sense of safety. So even if I offer some feedback to you and you feel that something wasn't that right and it was a kind of sting, then you could let me know, and we could just through empathic listening, you would end up feeling much better. And this is something that you find very comforting in our empathic circles.
Yes, definitely. And I agree with Nancy about saying it's something the silent listeners could do. I see it, it also gives them a role rather than just, listening. I mean, you can listen, but it also gives them something more to do. So I see value in that as well.
Mm-hmm. And you liked very much Nancy's comment on the participation of the third person, where usually the third person just pays attention to what is being exchanged between the two speakers. And you think that if the third person had the right to provide feedback, then her role would be even more active and meaningful in our empathic listening practice.
Yep, that's exactly right. And then, hold on here, I wrote down a couple other notes. The other thing that you noticed when you talked about, you made a distinction between being curious and interested. And I noticed that. And I thought, I wonder what the difference is. And I thought, and I can see, because I can almost see now, if you're curious about someone versus interested, it could maybe come off as maybe not as maybe judgmental, or it might make the other person uncomfortable because they may be, I don't know. So I don't know if the word's curious or interested, and what your distinction is, which I know you can't answer now, but what your distinction is between being curious and being interested, and how that difference affects the other person.
Mm-hmm. So one of my previous comments on the distinction between being interested in another person or being curious about what the person has done or said before, you might not be in a position to really explain the difference, but it's clear that my comment has really touched your heart, and you felt that yes, there is a difference, even though you can't really articulate the difference right now, and you would like to learn more about how this distinction could affect the quality of empathic listening. What is the effect this difference could have on the speaker?
Yes, yes. And then when Edwin talks about the going deeper, I'm really interested in that too, because I like deeper, richer connections with people, and surface level stuff I'm not as interested in. I don't get as much from it. I find myself getting distracted, and I think about other things, but that going deeper is something I'm very much interested in.
Mm-hmm. Edwin's comment about getting deeper into the other person, into the communication, is something that really resonates with you, and you really like it. You're deeply interested in that. Otherwise, you feel that you don't enjoy the process, and your heart is not really set in this listening session. It is an element that you really need.
Yes.
With people, keep a connection.
Yeah. And then one other quick thing, when Edwin was talking about the nonviolent communication process, an example of what Marshall Rosenberg always said is, you can talk about feelings, but they don't get deep. It's when you talk about the needs is what people connect with. Or you can reflect back feelings, but that doesn't cause as much connection as it does if you can identify the need. And just for a quick example of a need and a feeling, he talked about a couple that had their issue was financial difficulties. The husband thought the wife was spending too much money, and and then the wife got tired of that, of him always kind of criticizing her. So she was like angry, so he was angry at the wife, but his need was financial security and stability. So when Marshall Rosenberg, he could have just said, I sense anger, but when he said, I can sense that you're really angry about this situation because you have a need for financial stability and security, and that really connects that person. When you go that next level, they usually resonate a lot more with that.
Okay. So, with reference to what we mentioned before about deep connection, you thought you recalled what Marshall Rosenberg, I don't remember the first name, had said, that what really connects us with people is not talking about feelings, but identifying the needs that lie behind the feelings. And you mentioned the example of a husband who used to get angry at his wife's spending habits. But what Rosenberg noticed was that what he observed, let's say, was a little deeper, was that he really needed to feel more financially secure. That's why he used to nag at his wife. So when we are in a position to share, to identify our need and share it with the other person, then this is when real connection takes place.
Yes. Yes. So I feel fully heard.
Great.
So
Yeah, so I think we're just coming up to the time here, right? Is it? We only got like 12 minutes. I have so much to say on all these topics. I feel like there's another 2 hours here to work through all these. Yeah, so I just made notes. May I pick up next week on these? I don't know that. So I'm feeling kind of like chomping at the bits to address some of these issues. So
are we going to keep this? Are we going to keep this new habit we recently acquired that was giving us some minutes where we just can freely discuss about whatever we like? Are we going to?
Yeah, we could do that now for a few minutes. If you
no, we don't have enough time.
Okay, yeah, it's late for you. So, yeah.
No, it's okay for me, but 10 more minutes won't make any special difference in my sleeping habits. Yeah, okay, I would like to say a few things. I don't know if you would like to do the same. So what I would like to share with all of you tonight is that I feel that we have to take our empathy circle out of the incubator and just have real life experience and try to, instead of talk about how to drive the car, we should drive the car, and we should just try to see how empathic listening works when we have real disagreement. Otherwise, I think that we cannot improve the things that need to be improved. We just repeat the same thing. Okay, we can just do empathic circles for years. I mean, Ingrid can talk for years and I can just reflect for years. Okay, and what about this? But if let's say that we work with Ingrid and we were at the same company, let's say, and we had a disagreement, would we be able to find a solution or disagreement, or we would stop talking to each other? I mean, this is just something practical, and I really need an answer to this. I mean, answer not from you, but, I just want to see how it works.
Okay, then maybe I'll just throw in a few things. So in terms of one of the topics was going deeper, and one way to go deeper depends on the topic. Like the theme we have is sort of developing the training, and that has a certain, quality to it. But in another group, we're talking about fears. So Alex and I meet, and we specifically talk, what is the fear that you have? And it gets deep fast, just because it's the theme. So you start talking about your fear, you're getting to, a feeling that, there's something meaningful there. So that's one way to get to those deeper. And so anyway, that's something I just wanted to add. And the other thing is to make it real too, is been thinking about, how do we take this out into other relations, that we're learning how to do empathy circles with others and then come back and share our experience. So we kind of have that kind of aspect. So yeah, there's a lot. I do feel that, empathy takes time. It's sort of an emergent process, but, it does take time. It's like, it's just kind of part of it. So that's sort of my closing statement. So Ingrid or Nancy, do you want
to? I'm going to do an empathy circle at my house on the 20th of September, inviting 2 or 3 female friends over, and so I'm curious about how that goes.
Will you have specific topics or just whatever comes up?
I think it's whatever comes up, and because it's not recorded, and I think will probably be more personal issues, that's going on. So I am curious about Nancy's, what it today has been like for her.
Well, thanks for asking. It wasn't easy, and I'm not sure if I felt like I succeeded, especially with you, Mimi, and on some of the training stuff that you were talking about. So hopefully I did. I feel sort of like a baby communicator in this empathy circle work. So that's fine. It's good. It's challenging, and that's what I was looking for. So I think it's really interesting. I think that, you know, the pace is intriguing because it definitely slows down the pace of communication in terms of only one person at a time speaks, and they get to feel really heard, and there's no back and forth. And I always desperately want that back and forth, you know, that validation and that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting, just the fact that it kind of slows the whole communication process down. And having said that, in mediation, that's really super critical and important and valuable. And so the empathic listening work, I think, is going to be really helpful in mediation. I mean, I do it to a large degree now, and so more practice along those lines, I think, will be helpful, because I think really of many places, mediation is probably the perfect environment for empathic listening, because you really don't want the emotions as much as possible. You kind of want to, if the parties are really going at each other and they're angry and they're in disagreement, if the mediator can bring in some of that reflective listening and just really try and help the parties be understood. And then I think it makes a difference, and it helps get the issues out there. And I think, Mimi, you mentioned some of that too, how, you know, with disagreements, people need to be heard, and they can work things out with empathic listening if they're really committed to it. But so yeah, I think the mediation is a really great place to practice that and to observe, you know, how and when it's working, and definitely feel some relief that you don't need to bring in the emotions so much into it. But you know, that's a whole nother discussion. How much emotions and care do you show in mediation, you know, and who does that? So that's another discussion for another day, which, you know, like Mimi said, could take more minutes than what we have left. But so anyway, those are just some of my observations and thoughts kind of on the tail end of this thing today. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and so glad you could join us. This is really, it's a real contribution to kind of the insights and connection and the whole group. So glad you're here. So to close, we wanted to first we do a mirrored motion. So how are you feeling now? And let's turn that into a physical motion. And the one that was coming up for me was sort of like this. So yeah, that was the first. Just kind of popping, things are moving along. Yeah, okay. Mimi, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, just before this, what? You don't hear me?
I just lost you guys.
Oh, we hear you.
I'm back.
Okay. So I just what Nancy said about the feelings, I would really like to discuss this next time, because in empathy, as we said, you are into a kind of passion. So I just hear words reminded me of a video you have shared on empathy with where we have this cartoon thing, Edwin, do you remember, with the fox and the bear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sympathy one from
Emily something. Oh, yes, right, yes. And there, I don't know, Nancy, if you have, if you know this video, we can send it to you, of course, where the bear tries to absolutely empathize with the fox and share the feelings. And Renee, whatever the name is, said that when it comes to empathy, I have to connect to your feeling. So it's about feelings, and I take the risk to connect, to be reconnected to one of my feelings I experienced in the past. So the question is empathy about feelings, or should we leave feelings out of the door? because Renee Brown said something's different, and this is how I understand it. So we can discuss this next time. So I would say that I have a question mark. I have a question mark. This is what I feel right now, because I feel that we're really confused, or there is a variety of content when it comes to the word empathy. Yes.
Yeah, we got a confused question mark, and then
yes, something like this. Yes.
Ingrid, you're
So
Nancy?
at first I was feeling, it's kind of earlier before you did yours, Edwin, I was feeling kind of expansive like this. But then when Mimi brought up the confusion with the words and everything, then it was just like, oh.
It's not just, you got some real sound to it.
Yes. Yeah, because I feel the same way. And when if I have a minute, that
Sure.
it's the word empathy. When Chuck has talked with the men's groups, that it's that word that people don't understand, and they already have a preconceived idea of what it is. And even when he tried to talk to him about doing it, and he's found that using like active listening or reflective listening works better than using the word empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm done.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Nancy.
I think more than anything, I'm probably just feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of the information and all the concepts and the ideas and the conversation. So I'm looking forward to taking some time to kind of assimilate it and think about it and figure out, what do I tackle next in terms of absorbing more information. So overwhelmed. Which is better than the other. The opposite, right?
So Nancy, I just sent in the chat box. You can find the video I mentioned before. So you might not have watched this, and if you watch it, you will understand what I said about the bear and the fox. I think it's a very nice video. This one. Can you see
down below? There's it says chat. You click chat, that opens the window to the side. And when we close this window, it'll disappear. So if you're wanting to save it, you need to click on it now, because we're gonna.
Thanks for that warning.
Okay, did you get it? So, okay, so we had set, when we started off, we had set our intention, was to build a culture of empathy, and we want to take that intention with us. So what we do is we want to take it out with us in our daily life, and we're going to blow our intention out from wherever we are in the world, and a deep breath, and and there we go. That's the official closing of the circle. But
thank you, Edwin.